unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension. A dimension of sound. A dimension of sight. A dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas you've just crossed over into
the Te'o Zone. Mike Leon, thank you for joining us today. I thought I'd have a little fun with that. Mike, I think you've been on the Manti Te'o story probably more so than I have. Give us a timeline from when you first heard about the story to what you're catching now.
Well, Nick, thanks for having me back on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to talking about actual football and maybe actual wives and girlfriends as opposed to fictional ones. But this story is about as crazy as you can get, Nick. And I have to preface this by saying that having working with somebody who actually has a family member who plays on the Notre Dame football team makes the story even weirder for me because the player who I work with, Anthony Rabasa, he's a linebacker on Notre Dame. I happen to work with one of his relatives, and it's very weird because you're always hearing stories about the families and the tailgates that they have, and they're traveling to the road games of Notre Dame this year. And I've heard that he's actually a really good kid, and she's the person, the family member, has met him a couple of times, and they speak very highly of him. And then you see a story like this. So just to take you back, if you all recall, I think it was in early September. I think it was September 12th or September 13th, one of those two dates. Te'o, who is Hawaiian, has a grandmother who was 72 years of age who he found out passed away in Hawaii, and then later that day, there was a report of his girlfriend, Lene Kukua, 22 years old, who was a Stanford University student, that she had passed away of leukemia. And later that night against Michigan State, the Irish won in a really closely contested game. I believe Te'o had over 15 tackles in that game and an interception. And then, the story kind of continues from there and blossomed into, something of, that the girl was the love of his life, and that, he really cared about her a lot. And some of the faculty at Notre Dame had spoken about how, we've met her. She's a nice girl. And
wait a minute, I'm going to cut you off on that one, Mike.
That's the thing. That's the weirdest part about this story. But go ahead, Nick. What were you going to say?
No, well, I'm going to just jump on that because it's one thing if we're talking about a guy who's basically making up a whacked out story for whatever reason. It's quite another when the institution he's playing for is getting involved. Mike, you pay a lot more attention to college football than I do. Throughout the season, with Notre Dame and their involvement in this story, you were just saying right there that, members of the institution, I imagine members of the school, spoke of this woman. Mike, are you saying that members of the school, of the faculty, of whomever, talked about this woman like she existed, like they referred to her and said, "We've met her"?
Well, there was a fort, and one of the head priests there at Notre Dame, who's very popular, was he wasn't entirely sure, but the way he told the story, what's reported in the Deadspin story, was that he said, "I think I've met her. I recall meeting her." He wasn't entirely sure. He is an older gentleman. Obviously, actual immediate staff members like as Brian Kelly and Bob Diaco, some of the guys on Notre Dame staff, actually never met her. A lot of the players now, it's coming out in different reports that they never saw her either, met her. They kind of had a feeling that he may have made this up for the publicity angle of it because he does like attention. That's the new story that's coming out. There's a bunch of different scenarios. But
where's that story? Now, that story you're catching as far as, sorry to hit you off, as far as wanting to get attention, is that stuff that's starting to get leaked from the school, or is that an addendum to the Deadspin article? This because it seems to be
it's an addendum to the Deadspin article. what's been coming out recently, and now what you're noticing is with a lot of the major news outlets picking up on it, because of this story, the magnitude and what he did in the Michigan State game that night, following the supposed death. His grandmother's death was actually real. That's confirmed. But, with you tack on the death of his girlfriend, allegedly, it gave the story more credibility. College Game Day did a piece on him when they were there for the October Notre Dame-Stanford game, where Gene Wojciechowski interviewed him. And you do the request because his Heisman candidacy really started that evening. And so as a school has a candidate who becomes, a Heisman hopeful, like Johnny Manziel with Texas A&M, and Manti Te'o with Notre Dame, they start to divide the campaign, and the public relations people will get, inundated with interview requests from different news outlets. So what's happening now is a lot of the journalists who wrote pieces on Manti Te'o are actually coming out talking about some things in their story. The most telling one is Pete Thamel of Sports Illustrated, who actually I happen to know pretty well. He wrote a piece in regards to a story that he did on Te'o in October. And he said, as he was writing the piece, there was a lot of red flags in the piece, but he never really brought it up because, for example, he couldn't find, he did some background checks on this girl, Lene Kuku. He found out she never existed. He couldn't find a death transcript, which is what the Deadspin article said. He actually couldn't find any of Te'o's relatives who had actually met the girl. They had spoken about her as if they had met her, but they all, to a fault, said they actually never physically met her. So it was just little red flags he had brought up with his editor, and he was questioned about that today on the Dan Patrick Show. And it was just, by the time he spent 5 days on the Notre Dame campus, he said by the time he got to Manti Te'o, because he interviewed all these people for the story, kind of like a heartwarming piece on Te'o. By the time he got to him, it was kind of already, I guess, not confirmed, but it was kind of like I'm trying to look for the word, but it was already by so many people said, yeah, this girl was this and that to him. He talked about her. It was kind of like, it was so redundant that why ask the question of, hey, what, can you show me a picture? Or, what proof do you really have that this is your girlfriend? She just passed away. You're trying to be, as a journalist, you're trying to find out different things about the person, to make the story more compelling. In addition, to actually, validate it, but you're trying to respect his privacy at the same time because of what just happened with these two deaths. So it's a fine line, but a lot of these news organizations like ESPN and Sports Illustrated, when they did this original piece on him, they didn't really press him on these things. And now I think what's getting some of these, and I know if I was, a news editor at one of these big chains, I'd be upset because here is Deadspin, breaking an article about, the best player on arguably the most scrutinized college football team and most recognizable, college football program, I would say, not only in America, but I would say, worldwide. So I would think that there'd be some cause for anger at some of these news organizations that Deadspin broke this story.
Mike, we're about a minute and a half coming up until our first break on the Nick Saveri podcast with Mike Leon, youtube.com/NPZ1978. Mike, the last question before break, I guess, would be that the real winner of this story seems to be Deadspin. Mike, how is it possible that a website like that, who I think seemed to growing in notoriety in terms of attention and hits, when you look at internet metrics and things like that, how is it possible that Deadspin seemed to be so well researched on this story, and when it broke, it seemed completely reactive on the part of Notre Dame, on the part of ESPN, Fox Sports, CBS Sports, every other major sports media outlet seemed completely blindsided? How did Deadspin, basically what I'm asking is, how do you think Deadspin pulled that off? What do you think Deadspin's doing differently?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Deadspin in the last couple of years has been able to kind of distinguish themselves from a blog that's not taken serious and actually get, journalists, rather low level, maybe considered juniors at some of these other organizations like an ESPN, like the CBS Sports, they're starting to lend some credence. You know, first you need a couple of things. You need some luck, and then you actually need people that, you know, follow journalism to an integrity and don't just write a blog and give their opinion. You know, somebody that has sources, somebody that can write compelling pieces. But I think Deadspin has allocated more resources and time towards trying to turn away from that blog mentality that they once were. And, you know, they were kind of in the realm of, you know, a Barstool Sports type of thing, where they were a little bit of a lighter side of, you know, of some of these sports things and making comedy and stuff. I remember, I think they did the Minnesota Vikings piece about, you know, that the yacht cruise with the girls and the players. I think you're trying to move away from that and the levity of that with, you know, some actually hard-hitting stories. I think what happened here is that, you know, maybe one of these journalists, and like I said, I don't know for sure, but it's possible that one of these journalists that wrote this story, in fact, did his research on some of the articles that was written about Te'o with regards to some of these October, like I just mentioned, College Game Day doing an October piece on him, you know, in regards to the girlfriend and the grandmother dying at the same time. You also got to remember, you know, Nick, a lot of these things are public records. You know, you can look up, you know, death certificates, you know, in terms of, you know, where people died. You know, he said that she went to Stanford University. You know, the registrar at Stanford didn't have any record of a Lene Kukul actually going there. So it's not, as long as you put in a little effort and work into it, you know, with the Freedom of Information Act and the public records that are available to people if they actually want to investigate this. I think that the two guys who actually broke this story, you know, Timothy Burke and Jack Dickey over at Deadspin, I think they happen to do a great job in just doing their homework and tying the loose ends that guys like Wojciechowski and Famo, who are more seasoned reporters and probably have more connections and ties within these universities that don't want to break those relationships by writing this type of piece. I think that's the other part of it. You get away with it with your Deadspin, because if the article does come out and it's so astounding, but turned out to be true, it lends more credibility to what Deadspin's doing. So I think listen, you hit a home run with this, because this was one of the, and like I said, speaking from somebody who knows somebody who knows him very closely, this is a shocker for me, because I was in line with everybody else and felt really bad for this kid after everything that had happened to him. And could you just imagine if he had won the Heisman Trophy this year, you know, what people would be talking about now? That would be a totally different topic. But this is easily the weirdest story, I would say, you know, since the Tiger Woods story that broke a couple years ago.
Mike, I'm going to stop there. We're at about the 13-minute mark, so we went a little over on this. When we get back, two questions I'm going to ask. One is how I think Bomani Jones probably brought up a really good point about how Notre Dame is probably, or rather is, going to get around the issue of the Freedom of Information Act. And the second is going to be, what is our your take on what is our obsession with narrative in regards to Manti Te'o and Johnny Manziel, Heisman Football Trophy winner. So, folks, stick around. We'll be right back with the show, and we'll be... Damn, I blew this one. All right, I'll be back and try to be a little bit better. Stick around. And we're back on the podcast, once again, courtesy of youtube.com/NPZ1978. I am, of course, Nick Saveri with my good friend and podcasting colleague, Mike Leon. Mike, we left the last segment talking, the two questions I brought up was, one was what I'm going to bring up now about Bomani Jones. I don't know if you catch his Evening Jones podcast. He does it once a week. Typically, it's on Mondays. He actually did a special one last night in light of the Manti Te'o story. The one thing Jones brings up is the investigation that Notre Dame says they're participating in that broke during the news conference that they had at 8 o'clock last night, which really speaks to, and I don't want to get off on a tangent, but really speaks to how much the school seems to be really all in on supporting their player. But what's really interesting, and Jones brought this up, was as a private institution, Notre Dame is about to go out and allegedly, I guess, get a private investigator to look into this story. Mike, the one thing I would think about then is, since Notre Dame is a private school, is it quite possible that this is just one giant charade on behalf of the university to cover up what looks like a very embarrassing situation, with the hopes that Notre Dame can just squash this right now and write this off as a private investigator, and then go all Mitchell report and say it's going to take a few months for us to process. Hopefully, another scandalous story will break in college football to take our attention off of Manti Te'o.
Well, there's a couple of things to that. I'm going to answer it a couple of ways. First, I'm going to give you what I actually think happened, and then which it seems more plausible as you're getting more and more information from some of these news organizations as more and more details break. And then the second thing we can talk about is, really why Notre Dame would choose to back Te'o on this. Because let's remember something, Nick. Manti Te'o graduated from Notre Dame in December. He's a senior, and he's actually down here in Bradenton, Florida right now, working out, getting ready for the combine in February and then the April 2013 NFL draft. So while he did just, finish playing and led them to a 12-0 regular season and a berth in the national championship, you would think that the university would try to not so much distance himself, because it's not like, the two deaths of this family led to, a foundation being created, which has been talked about in a couple different articles. And I'm not sure so much about the validity of that so far. But, this scandal, unlike the Lance Armstrong scandal, didn't really lead to, millions lost in endorsements and this and that. We're talking about an amateur athlete, at, a college university who may or may not have a fictitious relationship with a girl that he met online who happened to pass away. So it's a little bit different than, what you're seeing in some of these other stories, because it didn't lead to any financial, loss or gain or something where an action can be taken. What I think with Notre Dame backing him, and I was telling a couple people this today, is, and I agree with Bomani Jones, I did happen to hear his version on it. I didn't hear the whole podcast, but I did hear his version about, Swarbrick kind of going, and that's Notre Dame's athletic director, kind of going all in. Because I think when Te'o presented to Notre Dame, allegedly, according to, the AD's, not testimony, his statement last night in that press conference, he said Te'o had told them about 2 weeks before the bowl game, right around the Christmas holiday, that, he thinks he was the victim of a hoax. Now, you got to remember something. The Deadspin article talks about numerous points where this actual Twitter account of the girl who passed away was sending out tweets. Now, as you know, anybody can send out a tweet under somebody else's, as long as they have their login and password. But that there was also a fictional conversation between two people who actually know a friend of Te'o's, who were talking about Manti's fake girlfriend. And this was like 3 weeks, in December. I think it was in early December. So there was always talk about this fictional girlfriend that he had in the cyber world. It was just never picked up by anybody. And I think the reason why Notre Dame has decided to back Te'o in this is because they're the institution that's been around, for over 200 years. They have the clout, and in terms of, they are Notre Dame. They're one of the top 25 schools in this country, private universities. They're private Catholic universities in the school. They're in U.S. News and World Report always for a lot of their the programs that they offer and the majors that they offer. Their academic excellence is only, paralleled by what's been going on athletically. Their basketball team is ranked in the top 25. Their football team just went, to the national championship game. Their women's basketball team has won a national title in the last couple of years. So they excel at both areas, academically and athletically, and they really are the New York Yankees, Duke basketball of, not only this generation, your father's generation, your grandfather's generation. People remember years of Notre Dame, being that Catholic university and that love them or hate them mentality that you have towards them. So I think if Swarbrick and, the head father over at Notre Dame, I think if they sat down with Te'o and they really believe in this kid's story that he told them, I think it would lend more credibility for the university to come out and say, well, we support him because, listen, we talked to him, we interviewed him, we hired our own private investigator, everything checked out, and we believe him. And we're going to lend our support. What I find weird is that they're lending support to a person who's no longer a student body. Actually, I think, and I have to correct myself, I think he does graduate in May, but he's actually not even taking any pertinent classes towards graduation. So, but still, he will be graduating from the university already, and there really isn't any, it's not like he's a present student. It's not like Te'o's a freshman or a sophomore where he's coming back to the university. So I find it very weird that they actually are throwing their support behind him, but I think it gives, if anything, if anybody out there has any reservations or doubts and says, you know what, I think Te'o really is the victim of a hoax, the first thing they'll probably point to is saying, well, look at the university. They're backing him. Why would they back him? They actually have no, financial gain in him, either way or any motivation behind it. Then look at them throwing their support. So I think that factors in heavily into why they did that. And I think what really happened in this leads to my second point. I just think that this is a story that Te'o had known about. And I'm not sure if he created it. Was he involved in some of it? I think he thought maybe he did meet a girl that was online. We can talk about, and it's been argued, on ESPN a lot by the talking heads as to him never visiting this fictitious girl, for the funeral, never seeing her when she went through chemotherapy. Well, now we know why, because she was fictitious. But we could go through all of that. But I think at the end of the day, some level of it was concocted. He was involved in some way. And then when the national media organizations like ESPN, like Sports Illustrated, picked up on the story in, towards the end of September going into October, and his Heisman candidacy started to rise, there was no way to back out from it. He had to stick with the story. And I think and with each interview, more and more layers of lies started to creep on it. You're seeing it now with the Sports Illustrated piece, with the Gene Wojciechowski piece, where people are just pointing to this, and that, saying, look at this inconsistent. He said he did this. He said he used to call her every night. And then he said he never really talked to her. And then the dad said he never met her. So it's more, once you're in a lie, I think as a man, once you're in a lie, you're going to lie your way out of it. And I think this is what happened with Te'o, unfortunately, in this situation.
Last question then before we get to the break. And folks, for those who are sticking around to hear Mike Leon brag about his prowess in the divisional round calling those games, stick around. We will let him have some time to crow. Mike, the question that I think about is, and this is something that's just been really bothering me when it comes to sports media, is the obsession with the narrative. I say a lot of times that when I watch sporting events, it seems to be that we are obsessed with trying to tell stories, as opposed to letting statistics, letting the game itself tell the narrative. And it seemed a lot similar in this case with Manti Te'o, that the death of his grandmother, the alleged death of his girlfriend, all of these things playing along, and then you factor in, you look at the story of Johnny Manziel. Manziel, of course, from Texas A&M, wins the Heisman Trophy as a freshman. And shortly thereafter, we're seeing pictures of Manziel in Vegas. We're seeing pictures of Manziel basically being, a guy, essentially. And while I have no problem with it, and I imagine you don't have a problem with it, most people who are familiar with the way Heisman voting works would probably tell you that if this story about Manti Te'o came out now, and the pictures of Manziel were to come out before the Heisman vote, both of those gentlemen would probably get significantly knocked down in the voting process, because it seems that the guys at the Downtown Athletic Club, ESPN, the major sports outlets, seem to be very obsessed with the image of a quote unquote good guy, and love to prop up stories about these players who are essentially larger than life. And they in this process of mythologizing these players, when stories like this come up, and we're seeing this with Lance Armstrong right now, obviously, that obviously reality starts to come crashing in. And in 2013, when you factor in the power of the internet, and Tiger Woods could clearly speak on this, I imagine, where does this obsession come from with telling the story of the player? It feels like what we experience in the Olympics every 4 years, which is essentially a collection of sports that are not marketable enough to make it every year and every, seasonally, but good enough to appear every 4 years on a TV set. and NBC inundates us. Wow, this is a long question. Inundates us with stories, and it makes us feel an awful lot like we're watching Lifetime. And I use that channel a lot because that's what Lifetime does. It is a channel for stories. It's a channel for drama. And we seem to bring that into the realm of sports. And Mike, do you feel that's a case of trying to paint a story in effort to bring in more fans who, unlike yourself and myself, are not satisfied by simple competition and statistics? Or is this playing to what sports analysis or sports journalism used to be, which was the obsession of the narrative and the way we mythologize players in the 40s and 50s and so on, before the internet and television really started to let us get a good glimpse into the fact that these are simply guys like us that get paid a whole lot of money, or in the case of Manti Te'o, soon to be getting paid a whole lot of money, that are not nearly the moralistic figures that we make them out to be. Mike, where do you stand on that, the obsession with the narrative, and do you think that plays a role in the Heisman vote, and where do you think it stems from in the way we understand sports today?
Well, it's a complicated question, Nick, but, it's one that you raised that's really well. And, I refer back to the movie, and I was just thinking of this as you're asking the question, the movie Ali, starring Will Smith, with John Voight playing Howard Cosell. And a lot of the interactions between Cosell and Ali that weren't captured on camera was of them actually being friends. And you see one scene in the movie where he's helping him, and he calls him to break the news to him about that, he's going to be cleared of all the charges, and he's not going to have to serve any prison time. And meanwhile, they're doing a camera interview a couple of days earlier, and, he's being playful with him but kind of mean to him. And I think what's happened nowadays is that journalism, in addition to these athletes, and at the era of the ESPN, where the athletes have decided to, the sportscasters and the journalists have ingratiated themselves with these athletes, and it's now become, kind of like a centrifuge where everything's all mixed together. And these guys go on Sports Center, and you start to see these guys, even when I was working at ESPN, you start to see these guys on the campus. You get to talk to the athletes. I remember, I'd seen Jared Dudley a bunch of times when I was working up there. So he would come on the set first take during the NBA lockout. We would always talk, say hi to each other. And it lends you to, if you now have to write an article or a story, positive or negative, about an athlete that you're covering, you start to put a little bit of your own emotion into the article. Unfortunately, you're not supposed to as a journalist, but unfortunately, sometimes you do. And I think what's happening now is that era of you're seeing a lot of these ESPN commercials where the athletes are, this is Sports Center commercials, and the athletes are in the commercials themselves. And I think that's kind of taking away of the way it used to be, with a newspaper, and you're writing a piece, and, if the guy didn't like the article, he didn't like the article. If you like the article, so what? And I think the narrative part of it that you're talking about lends to, in terms of trying to reach the different target audiences. You're seeing it a lot. Costas does his own little narrative piece on Sunday Night Football, always around the 8 o'clock mark before they're getting set to a game. You always hear a lot about the athletes, when Peyton Manning had his neck injury, how he's coming back. Adrian Peterson with the ACL tear, how phenomenal it would be for him to, lead the Vikings in the playoffs. He almost breaks the rushing record, and then talk about something good that he's done in the community and this and that. The thing with Te'o, with his grandmother and his girlfriend allegedly dying, and all of a sudden, he leads Notre Dame to a big victory on the road against Michigan State in an ABC primetime game. All of these things fuel ratings, Nick. Ratings leads to money. And unfortunately, it's all kind of, encapsulated itself all into one big thing, and it's a big cluster, unfortunately. And I think that's the problem now. These journalists and these sportscasters have crossed over into the athlete's world in terms of, being too sociable instead of knowing that it's somebody you're actually covering, and you need to take, you need to draw that line and, not be biased one way or the other. You're a journalist. You're supposed to give both sides of it. You see it already in nightly news organizations with, Fox News on the right and MSNBC on the left, and CNN that tries to play it down the middle, but they can't. And you see it in television, and you see it in these sports stories that are written, and that's why I think it's kind of funny that Deadspin and I'm not going to put them in a news organization category, but Deadspin broke the article, and I think it's got to be driving these news organizations nuts that a website like a Deadspin, could break a news story like this when, these other companies have such big resources tied into journalistic efforts and, the shows that they do and the reporters that they have in the field and this and that. So I think that's a big part of it. It's funny that you mentioned the narrative part. I'm touching on that again because you do see it very often. I think the one thing that Te'o, if you can take out of this story, that Te'o has to do is the forgiveness part of it, which is the next part that comes with it. You just saw Lance Armstrong with the Oprah interview. And unfortunately, a lot of times athletes tend to, admit to a mistake, and the mistake is within a year rapidly forgotten. How quickly we have forgotten that Alex Rodriguez, used performance-enhancing drugs. And, that was the big hot topic. How quickly we have forgotten that Tiger Woods slept with over, 30 women and committed adultery almost on a nightly basis to his wife. And she got divorced, and they settled out a quote for $104 million. But you don't talk about these once an athlete actually has, and I hate to use the term, but their Oprah moment, and they go out there and actually admit to their faults, and not I don't want to use a biblical term like confess their sins, but they actually say their mistakes in a public forum, and America forgives them, and it's part of the narrative, part of the comeback story, and unfortunately, it's the way of the world right now, and I think there's a bunch of different factors that blend into it, but the narrative part of it is something that I think is ingrained now in the American bloodline of this comeback story or this hero. There has to be a hero and a villain to every single thing, and it's the way of the journalism now. And I can't speak for what it was before, but I can tell you it doesn't help with social media and all these different outlets as to reaching the news and bloggers and this and that. Everybody has an opinion in a forum, as we're doing right now with this podcast, and that's the way the world has moved into talking about a narrative and setting up a story.
Well, I wrap up that segment thinking of the immortal words of Slim Charles from The Wire in season 3 when they were wow, man, totally forgot the reference. But basically what Charles is saying is, or the quote Charles is, if it's a lie, we fight on that lie. And that seems to be where Notre Dame's coming from. Folks, when we come back, Nick will hopefully, me going third person, will hopefully get his Wire references right. And we'll finally get into some real football as opposed to made-up women and all the great things that come along with it. Stick around. Moving away from Notre Dame football and the alleged made-up, or the, not even alleged, the made-up exploits of everyone's favorite romantic, Manti Te'o, we move on to the NFL, where narratives are still spoken, but they are about the wrong team, as in the case of Brian Billick calling the Seattle Seahawks the team of destiny shortly before they lost to Matt Ryan and the Atlanta Falcons. I think Billick can take the jinx on that one. Folks, my name is Nick Saveri. You can find me on Twitter, NPZ1978. I am joined by a all-world master of all sports-related material, in addition to all other things, HBO, ESPN, you name the media outlet, it's quite possible Mike Leon knows someone or has worked in that outlet. Mike, where can we find you on Twitter?
Nick, it's funny. Checks in the mail along with my resume, so he's citing the news organizations, but at DAKIDLEO at the Kid Leon.
Thank you. And of course, the show today will be featured on YouTube.com, youtube.com/NPZ1978. Moving on to the NFL. Mike, Sunday afternoon, 2 o'clock it starts, which is hysterical because Fox will say it's 2 o'clock, but we all know that's really pregame nonsense until the game actually begins. San Francisco travels to Atlanta, 1 versus 2 for the right to go to the Super Bowl in New Orleans this season. Mike, I'm going to begin with a couple of numbers from Saturday night's game. 20, 13, 15, 19, 18, 54, and 16. Folks, those are the largest run totals, or those are the longest runs of Kaepernick's night against the Packers. Mike, by the way, interesting side note, I don't know if you saw the ESPN story that came out a little while ago. Apparently Aaron Rodgers, quarterback of the Green Bay Packers, who's gone fishing, as they would like to say on TNT, is calling the read option a fad, saying that it will probably go away as quickly as the Wildcat offense in Miami. Mike, is that just sour grapes, or is Rodgers possibly onto something?
He's half right, Nick. If you look at the quarterbacks that are in this past year's draft class, and then this coming year's draft class, so that means RG3, Russell Wilson, and Andrew Luck. Only one of them really runs a read option, but all three of them are really proficient as passers. I think you would agree yourself that Kaepernick is not a great passer. Does he get the ball down in time? Yes. Does he throw with some velocity? Yes. He still lacks a little bit on in terms of touch and accuracy, but he's better equipped right now as a runner. There's very few quarterbacks that do both brilliantly. I think RG3 is arguably, when he's healthy, at his best at doing both. He can really put touch on the ball and accuracy for this early stage in his career. He can also take off when he needs to and show that 4.3 track speed that he did. But I think Rodgers is a little bit right, because if you look at some of the quarterbacks coming out in this draft class, Geno Smith doesn't necessarily run the read option in college. Matt Barkley is a pro-style drop-back quarterback. So there's not too many, even Mike Glennon from NC State, who's 6'4", runs a pro-style offense down there at NC State, under Tom O'Brien and Dana Bible, the offensive coordinator. So they really don't, these guys like Barkley, Geno Smith, and Glennon, who are the wave of quarterbacks that are coming into the draft this year, even if they were to get with a team, none of those would actually be running any sort of read option in their offense. Now remember how quickly the Wildcat dissipated from Miami's playbook, because the year after, if I'm not mistaken, I think Ronnie Brown got injured, and Ricky Williams had an okay year, but they did draft Pat White, but they never really used him in that role. And then the year after that, Ronnie Brown left, and Ricky Williams went to the Ravens. So they really, since that Sperano year in 08 when they won the AFC East, they didn't really use the Wildcat after that. And you look at the Jets this year saying they were going to use Tebow in some type of Wildcat package, with some spread read. They didn't really do it. But Denver last year, with people doing that, they tried to run other type of sets where they would have him in shotgun formation, they'd have him on the center, and that the game in shotgun formation works a little bit because it gives him time to not so much read defense, but he can actually throw or he could run for a first down. But when he was on the center, it didn't really work well for him. So in this league, you really need to be adaptable in terms of what you can do on the offensive side of the ball. Aaron Rodgers is very good where he can take off and gain a couple yards in chunks. He can throw the ball very accurately. He throws it with velocity. He's the type of prototypical quarterback, if he was a little bit taller, maybe Kaepernick's height, that you would look for. I think the NFL is moving towards mobile-style quarterbacks. But in terms of this read option, the reason why San Francisco is running it, you'll see as they start to develop receivers, because Crabtree is really the only receiver. Randy Moss, how much longer do you expect him to play? They really don't have another option in the passing game except Vernon Davis. But so they have to incorporate this element into their offensive scheme because, Frank Gore's been banged up this year. Michael James has really helped out, but, they signed Brandon Jacobs in the offseason. He hasn't really played that much this year. They have Kendall Hunter, who got hurt. So they're really doing it because Kaepernick can run well, can run and throw. And he did a phenomenal job, Saturday night. There was really nothing to complain about with his game. He moved the ball very efficiently. He broke large runs when he needed to. He limited his mistakes on the offensive side. And I don't think it was shocking that San Francisco defense gave up 31 points. I think it is shocking. We talked about last week on the podcast, if we had to rate the four of them, we would have rated as, Green Bay's offense, maybe San Francisco's defense, and Green Bay's defense and San Francisco's offense as the fourth best of the four units. And unfortunately, San Francisco's offense, turned out to be the best unit on the night. They played really well. And I think Rodgers is half right. I think we're not going to see a lot of read options because, some colleges do it as gimmicks, but you notice that the quarterbacks that are doing it at those colleges are not getting shot at that next level. So therefore, the guys who are in pro-style offenses, or are extremely good athletes, like a Geno Smith, like a Matt Barkley, are going to get that shot at the next level to be the quarterback, a prototypical pro-style quarterback that everyone's looking for. That has some mobility. You don't want the stick figures anymore. Andrew Luck has some mobility, Russell Wilson has mobility. You need to have that element in the game. But he's half right that we are moving away from that zone read. It is a little gimmicky, but like I said, it suits the skill set and gives Jim Harbaugh and his staff credit for incorporating it with Kaepernick, and it worked well because here they are, in the second straight year, in the NFC Championship.
To counter what Rodgers said in that same article, Fran Tarkenton, legendary quarterback for the Vikings, had also said that he could see the read option or the mobile quarterback becoming the next wave of quarterbacks. Although I do feel a little jaded when I say that because I do feel like I had this same feeling, or at least I heard the same thing when we watched players like Steve McNair, Randall Cunningham perhaps, maybe most notably Michael Vick. What especially fascinates me now about these three quarterbacks is when you compare them to Michael Vick. An interesting note about Vick, by the way, Kaepernick's run on Saturday night, Kaepernick's running yards on Saturday night totaled about I think it was 187, 183, I forget. The most actually...
Yeah, 181.
Thank you. Closest Mike Vick ever came to that was 173 yards in 2002 versus Minnesota. That information, of course, comes courtesy of ProFootballReference.com. Kaepernick's runs, though, you look at those yardage, one thing that's especially notable is 4 of the 7 long runs came on third down. And it does make you think, Mike Leon, that partly those long runs come in the sense on a passing down, typically you're looking at 3rd and 9, 3rd and 10, 3rd and 8 was the first long run of 20 yards. That might be either a compensation for Kaepernick to not have to throw the ball, although he was also lighting it up just as well on the passing end, but possibly just taking advantage of a passing defense by the Packers that isn't able to adjust to the run. And that I don't know. Mike, this team, the 49ers go up against an Atlanta team that's 26th in the league, giving up 40.3%. 38% on third down conversions. That number comes, of course, courtesy of TeamRankings.com. Atlanta's defense giving up rushing first downs gives up about 6.4 a game. That's 20th in the league. Finally, the Falcons defense gives up 123 yards per game rushing wise. Mike, as we talked about last week, the numbers in the regular season don't really necessarily hold up because all of this comes down to one game. And before I get into a whole Any Given Sunday rant courtesy of Al Pacino, for one game, can the Atlanta defense be able to adjust to a quarterback like Colin Kaepernick?
Well, Nick, if the game had ended 27-7, or 27-13 as it should have on Sunday, I would have said yes. But the reason why, and now that the Packers have been eliminated, I really think San Francisco will win this game, is because I think Atlanta's defense is going to struggle at times, and I think the big thing now has been Atlanta's offense. Matt Ryan has been turnover prone in some of these playoff games that we've seen. We saw it in the Giant playoff game. Last year. We saw it in the Packer game a couple years ago. He's been prone to some interceptions, and at opportune times, Seattle's defense really capitalized that. Had a big interception by Earl Thomas in that game. I really thought that Atlanta would play well. Like I had told you, I said Atlanta, they're really they're fighting for something here because this is the first time, actually the second time, that they've been home and had an opportunity to have the Super Bowl, and the road to the Super Bowl kind of run through Atlanta. And I really think that they wanted to send a message in terms of, listen, we can do it with this core of players, with the Tony Gonzalez, Matt Ryan, Michael Turner, Julio Jones core, that we can actually get to a Super Bowl, especially if we defend our home turf. And like I said to you in last week's podcast, they added some weapons in the secondary, Thomas McLeod, and then, Asante Samuel was such a veteran corner. And these guys really played well on the onset of the game. And I thought Atlanta's D-line got a little bit of pressure to make Wilson uncomfortable, but, they forced a turnover on Marshawn Lynch, who that was a big thing because Lynch had a couple turnovers this postseason that, were head-scratchers, and there were times where his team was actually driving or in position to score. So that kind of hurt a little bit. And then you could also talk about, Pete Carroll and the clock management there at halftime and then not kicking the field goal to actually make it, a 13-3 game. But after having said all that, Atlanta still had a 27-7 lead. 27-7 lead. They had really played well offensively and moved the football. Jacquizz Rodgers was running the ball well. Michael Turner broke a couple big runs. And that Ryan was throwing the ball well downfield. But something clicked in the fourth quarter, and I think it was basically Seattle's defense being able to get pressure up front, which they couldn't in the first half. And it led to Ryan making some costly mistakes, forcing Atlanta's offense to make a play on third and long, and they couldn't, and they got him off the field. And then Russell Wilson did what he does. He broke off runs. Russell Wilson is a very good quarterback, and I haven't seen him up close and personal when Rutgers played North Carolina State when he was still a sophomore there. I haven't seen him in person myself. I know what he's capable of. He's not very tall, but he can throw the ball with accuracy. He can see downfield. He creates vision lanes for himself by moving out of the pocket to be able to see downfield. And he's not going to make a mistake. And he made Atlanta's defense chase him. He has that Roethlisberger-type quality in him where he can actually, keep the play alive to allow one of his receivers to get open. And Seattle's Golden Tate and Sidney Rice and some of these guys took advantage of it. And I think San Francisco is going to employ a little bit of the same because a couple of things. They have a good running game with James and Frank Gore, that's been coming on as of late. Two, they have a tight end who can really create mismatches against the linebackers, for Atlanta. And then three, it's up to Kaepernick to not turn the ball over, which is, easier said than done and obviously stating, the obvious. But if Kaepernick is not the type of quarterback that will run to keep, let his receivers, allow them time to get open downfield and stuff like that and to keep the play going. He's the type of quarterback to take off to actually gain positive yardage, and they're designed runs sometimes in the offense. And I think he's going to be the key because if he keeps the chains moving and doesn't have San Francisco in third and longs and has them in third and shorts, which they excel on because of their power running game and their old line, I think San Francisco can contain a lot of the time of possession, just like they did in the Green Bay game, run more plays offensively. And I think their defense is slightly a little bit better than Seattle's because Seattle was missing Clemens, their top pass rusher. I think San Francisco defense is playing a lot better. Alden Smith, is just as good a pass rusher as Clemens. Justin Smith may play on Sunday. I'm still not sure about that. And I think they can get some pressure on Matt Ryan. And we've seen Matt Ryan in some of these games, and especially in the fourth quarter, was magnified as to how he tends to clench up and turn the ball over in some of these situations. And I really think San Francisco wins this game, Nick, and I think I know you feel the same way.
I do. San Francisco's defense, folks, is third against the run, fifth against the pass. You factor in that, and you throw out the number against the Packers because I think we all assumed that Green Bay's offense was going to get that kind of those many points. Also, you factor in that the Green Bay defense or the San Francisco defense got tired out by the fact that the 49ers offense was just putting up points at such a regularity that the defense really had no chance to get rested. They go up against an Atlanta team that I think that fourth quarter is very telling, and that seems obvious that we're playing the result now. But In the fourth quarter, it looks like Atlanta's defense basically changes up, and you start off. Wilson throws for about 69 yards, and then goes on to a touchdown run by Wilson actually, to get the game 13-27. As you talked about before, Ryan of course gets picked up by Earl Thomas, balls at the Seattle 39. Then Wilson gets a pass to Zach Miller for the touchdown. Then of course we have this long exchange, finally resulting in Wilson again with a touchdown pass to with a Lynch run to bring it to 28-27 after the extra point. In the span of a quarter, Atlanta, and most people tend to agree, seemed to do everything humanly possible to give away this game. And factoring that quarter and the team they're going to see in the San Francisco 49ers, it's very hard for me to process this game going in any direction other than the Atlanta Falcons not going any further and the 49ers going back to the Super Bowl for the first time since 1995. But again, while we're talking about predictions, I'm going to go over my list, and I'm just going to shamelessly explain how horrible my picks have been. Let's go over last week, shall we? I took Denver 31-14. That didn't work so well. I took the Packers 28-17. That didn't work so well. I took the Seahawks 21-14. Not so good. And of course, New England. By the way, as I'm talking about New England, I would like to extend a big thank you to Bill Belichick. Folks, Saturday night, I was all set to go out for dinner. Denver-Baltimore game is going on. My fiance and I are ready to go. We've got a restaurant in town. We're going to go check it out. We're about to leave. When the game is closing up, Flacco drops back. It's third down. The game's over, folks. It's about 40 seconds left on third down. And suddenly, Raheem Morris turned into me when I was 7 years old playing Little League in the outfield. And that ball gets over his head. Jacoby Jones takes it in for a score. Long overtime period and going into a second overtime period. Folks, needless to say, we didn't go to the restaurant we wanted to, and I got a whole lot of ugly stares. The next day, of course, it's the afternoon. It's the afternoon game, Houston at New England. And I keep complaining about the scheduling about this because, Mike, we knew this game was going to be the blowout. This was going to be the game that was very predictable because the Patriots are just like that. And Bill Belichick, to no one's surprise, took advantage of that game quickly and made it much easier for me and my lady to go out. So, Bill Belichick, if you are listening to this podcast, like the growing fandom base that will eventually be listening to this podcast, I and my fiancé sincerely thank you, even though I hope you get stomped on Sunday. Mike, so my predictions obviously have been bad. So for me at this point to say the 49ers are a likely win, it might as well be just me saying that the Falcons are going to win because I'm going to jinx it. But if I had to, if I got to just go with what I'm thinking, yes, I would take the 49ers. Mike, but I'm going off that fourth quarter. Do you tend to feel the same way? Are you basing Seattle's big comeback on the Falcons just not choking, but just playing tight, Ryan with a huge interception? Do you tend to take more stock in that fourth quarter or the first half for the Atlanta Falcons in their likelihood, or rather in their performance on Sunday against San Francisco? Which was more telling? Which is more likely what we're going to see?
I think what was more telling was the fourth quarter. But having said that, I actually said to one of my friends, the Falcons had a propensity that year, and we saw it, Nick, against our team, the Raiders, and I think I mentioned in the podcast, that they have a knack for, having a tie game late in the fourth, this season at least, and then Matt Ryan making a couple plays in the passing game to allow, Matt Bryant, who's their kicker, who's been really good this year, to go ahead and make a field goal from any length. That's how they ended up beating the Raiders, and that's how they've beaten a couple of teams this year in the fourth quarter. They played really well late in the fourth quarter of games. It's been very weird, the Falcons season, because they do something like that in the regular season, and then you see them stake themselves to a 27-7 lead against a team who obviously looked tired. We talked about the impact of the travel going, Seattle went back to Seattle, after the Washington game, then they flew down to Atlanta, over 6,000 miles of travel, the time zone changes, this game being at 1 o'clock, which was 10 o'clock, West Coast time. You saw the Lynch fumble. You see the brain fart, for lack of a better term, by Pete Carroll, at halftime, and also not kicking the field goal when it was, a 13-0 game. So here are all the staples to really hammer home and, have a 34-7 playoff win or whatever it was, in the fourth quarter. And it let the team get some confidence to get back into it. And the team started to play tight. And it led to, tight calls in the play calling where there were some design runs on 3rd and long to just pump the ball. And Matt Ryan did turn the ball over when they did try to pass the ball downfield. I think he gives Seattle a little bit of credit, but I think a lot of people in the media are going to say it lends itself to Atlanta, kind of putting that pressure and exerting that pressure on themselves, and maybe they won't live up to it. And here's a team like San Francisco, who was just in, the NFC Championship game last season with the experience, with the entire, team back, playing in this championship game for the second time in a row, a team who's not scared to win on the road, and who has a really good coach and a really good defense. And so it just everything lends itself to a San Francisco win because of the fact that they've been there and stuff like that, and what Atlanta has done just in their one postseason game this year, but what they did in that game to kind of cough up that lead. So I think you put more stock into the fourth quarter meltdown because, like we were talking about earlier with sports and narratives, that's been Atlanta's narrative throughout their 4 years in the playoffs under Mike Smith. But I think that you've got to look at what they did in the first quarter really well, and Atlanta will, as getting Jacquez Rogers involved in the running game and Tony Gonzalez in the passing game and the deep passes that they did with Roddy White to take advantage of the secondary. And they can do that with San Francisco as well. But I really do think that San Francisco that has the playoff experience, they're tested, second year in it. I really do think they get there, and I think they get there 31-24 on the road.
Yeah, I actually, that's actually a closer score than I'm going to give it. I tend to think the 49ers defense is going to be better, will actually perform better, because I don't think the Atlanta offense is as dynamic or is led by as good a quarterback as Aaron Rodgers. I'll take the 49ers actually I'll probably take them 31-17, I think, over the Atlanta Falcons. Mike, let's take a break there. We can both breathe and take this all in. Folks, we're going to go to break. When we get back, let's take the last game apart of the day, which is the AFC title game. New England hosting Baltimore in a rematch of last year. Stick around, folks. So we move from the Georgia Dome to Gillette Stadium in New England. Folks, thank you, of course, for coming back with us. This is the Knicks Are Very Podcast with Mike Leon. YouTube.com/NPZ1978. Mike, over the break, I checked out something interesting, or at least I thought it was kind of interesting, is if you happen to go to the football database on the web, you can find them at footballdb.com. There's a section that will actually take you through a history of team-by-team performance. In other words, if you want to see how the Browns have done against the Steelers historically, you can do that. Since 2007, other than the blowout in January 2010, the Ravens 33, Patriots 14, in the wild card playoff game. The Ravens and Patriots have played unbelievably close games, most notably last year's championship game, New England 23, Baltimore 20, of course. This season, Baltimore 31, New England 30. Mike, as much of a stats person I am, this is the one game that, as soon as it was established these two teams are playing, I basically quit on looking at numbers, because these two teams seem to play each other so well. They seem to have a really good sense of each other's offense and defenses, and they're both extremely playoff tested. Mike, again, getting away from the narrative, Baltimore comes back into New England, obviously looking for revenge, and in the best setup possible. What's to make me think this game stays as close as it has been years past, or do you think this might be the year we see a change like we did back in 2010 with Baltimore taking a good road win over New England?
Nick, when we first started doing these, and we first did the first playoff podcast, I think I had mentioned to you there that the team in the AFC that you could legitimately see getting to a Super Bowl run is Baltimore, and it's because of the playoff experience that they have, under Harbaugh and doing this, the last 3 years. The wins that they've been able to rack up on the road in some of these venues, like when they won at Pittsburgh, when they won at New England, that you just mentioned, at 31-14. Everyone remembers the first play of the game with Rice's, 75-yard touchdown run. They have a propensity for winning these type of playoff games and then getting to that big stage, that championship game, in the AFC, and then kind of faltering. And this is their third time getting to this stage, and I think third time is the charm. I've been on Baltimore, from the onset of these playoff podcasts, and it's because of a couple of things. One, Ray Rice had a remarkable game last week. He had 131 yards rushing. And this was on 30 carries. We had mentioned, in the podcast last week, and I had told you that if Flacco just doesn't turn the ball over, and he just stays within himself and takes advantage of the mismatches he has with his receivers that are physical 6'2", 6'3" receivers like Bolden and like Torrey Smith, and and Dennis Pitta and Ed Dixon in the passing game for the tight ends, and Pearson, Rice in the backfield are good running options. Their O-line is solid on the left side, especially with Michael Orr. And Baltimore's defense has really found kind of its second win in the secondary. And, in their front seven, re-adding Ray Lewis, who's the emotional soul of that team. But, Terrell Suggs is healthy. The D-line's getting pressure with Kruger and Nada up front, Terrence Cody. And they just seem to be a team that has decided mentally to break any of those hurdles that, listen, we're going to be in this game. All we need is one stop. All we need is the ball back. All we need is this. And it's had more evidence on the Jacoby Jones play. It's evidence in the first possession of overtime where they got the ball and actually had the punt, and the defense gets a 3-and-out. Those kind of mental hurdles within a game sometimes defeat teams. And the Ravens, because they're tested, because they've been in this situation, and because they have a Harbaugh coaching them, it seems like, they've been able to really harp on these things and kind of live in the moment and don't get too high, don't get too low. And that's why you've seen them be able to go into Denver when nobody except me and maybe some of the Ravens front office and the players, especially not you, Nick, with my phone, especially not you.
That's absolutely true.
Gave them no chance, and you see them go out and steal a quality road victory. And everyone wants to point to the Jacoby Jones play, and rightfully so, because it was the last play of the game, and it led to tying the game. But Baltimore was really in that game from the onset. It was I think arguably the 4 games of the weekend. I think everyone would say that and the way Atlanta's fourth quarter wrapped up were arguably the 2 best games of the weekend. But I think the advantage that Baltimore has in this game on Sunday is really the ball control offense that they're going to have to play. New England's secondary has been really coming around as of late. Akeem Talib, the acquisition of him after he was cut by Tampa Bay, has really been big for New England. It's funny because I have a Buccaneers friend of mine who's, of course, adamant now, of course, get him off our team and now he's doing great. That seems to be a syndrome with a lot of players who get cut mid-season, go to another team, and then perform well. And Talib has been playing really well. They've moved Devin McCourty, over to safety now, and he's really transitioned well to his new role there. The D-line has been able to get some pressure, and, we talked about the Patriots, I think, in an earlier podcast before the playoffs, how they led the NFL this season in forced turnovers. And so their defense has been opportunistic at times. Gerard Mayo and Vince Wilfork up front, they've been able to get some pressure, and the secondary has really been playing well. But it's up to the Ravens offensively, if they can take some advantages with the play action and get Rice going, and Rice seems to play very well up in New England in the 2 playoff games he's played up there, if they can get Rice going and keep Brady off the field. Every team that tries that strategy, but this is something that they really need to implore and harp home, because we saw against the Texans, who have just as decent a secondary, I would say, as Baltimore. We saw what Brady was able to do early in the onset. Then we saw the emergence of Vereen, and then you saw I forget the other running back, Rainey. Excuse me, not Rainey. But the other New England running back who was able to start the ground game for them effectively because of the injury to Danny Woodhead. The big loss for New England is Gronkowski obviously being out for the rest of the playoffs for the arm injury that he suffered earlier in the season. That's going to take away a weapon in their passing game, and it's going to put some more onus on Aaron Hernandez, who I actually think, if you have Hernandez and Gronkowski, it creates mismatches because, the linebackers that are going to be matched up on them. But I think with just Hernandez there now, I think the Ravens have a little bit of that advantage in terms of that, and they need to get some pressure up front. Nada and Kruger need to exert themselves like they did in the Colt game against the Colts O-line. And this Patriot O-line up front is very experienced, and I'm torn because I've been taking the Ravens, but something always eats at me and says New England finds a way to win these games. I'm still going to stick with the Ravens. I like them to go up there and pull off the shocker and walk out of there, on a late field goal, with a 28-27 victory. And I think it'll be that close to the game. I really don't see, even if the Patriots were to get, a 10-point lead in this game, I don't see where, the Ravens can't come back with their offense. Like I said, as long as Flacco stays within himself like he did in the Denver game, and the ball control offense with Rice, as long as Rice gets going, because he's been the cog that we've talked about for their offense to get going. As long as he gets going, I really do think the Ravens can win this game. I know you'll probably feel differently because, it's Tom Brady back there, and we've seen him do it time in and time out.
No, actually, I'll surprise you. I think the Ravens are going to win this game too. It's funny because
now I don't know how.
I think as soon as this matchup was set. See, I imagine typically when you have a home field matchup, like New England does against Baltimore, you go into a game typically thinking that you have your home field, you are already in a good position to win. I am pretty sure that the minute that field goal went up in overtime to beat the Denver Broncos, New England's entire team, wherever they were, everyone at home tweeting, whatever, watching the game, all collectively said the word, pardon my language, shit. I am positive that in this game, the Ravens wanted nobody else except New England. And I am positive that the Patriots wanted no part of the Baltimore Ravens. And I think this is a perfect matchup because Tom Brady wants nothing to do with this team. Tom Brady, history shows us, is not a good quarterback against pressure. And in the last playoff game last year, in the championship game, Brady had a couple of interceptions that were completely predicated by pressure. And this is exactly why the Giants are 2-0 against the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Tom Brady is not a quarterback that deals with pressure up the middle. And Haloti Ngata is maybe without question, other than Vince Wilfork, one of the best defensive tackles in the league. With Paul Kruger, they make a menacing enough defensive line that is going to get to Brady. I don't think Brady's offensive line has gotten that much better this year. I feel that it's essentially it's a pure rematch of last year. There doesn't seem to be much of a difference between the two teams. Statistics-wise, the one thing I do think about for New England is their pass defense, which is 30th in the league, giving up 275 yards per game. New England's run defense, by contrast, is 7th in the league, giving up only 101 yards. New England's pass defense is not even as good, and this is very telling, as Denver's pass defense was, and we just saw what Torrey Smith did to Champ Bailey. I'm not even sure what's going to happen when Flacco's able to air it out. And the best joke I heard all week was the fact that Baltimore is going into a warmer climate than they saw in Denver on Saturday night. I think that ball's going to travel even farther, I love what Anquan Bolden has been doing in these playoffs, and he might well be the MVP so far of the postseason with the 2 games he's had so far. And Torrey Smith is a matchup nightmare for a New England secondary that's going to, unlike Denver, is going to have to respect the deep passing game of Baltimore. Mike, one thing that was fascinating to me was to watch the confusion of the safeties, or the confusion specifically of defensive coordinator Jack Del Rio of the Denver Broncos, because with Baltimore, you know they're a running team. You perceive them as a team that runs the ball and plays defense. The safeties for Denver had no choice but to play the run, allowing Champ Bailey and the other DB to go one-on-one with the Ravens, and all game long that didn't work. And if any reason Del Rio should be fired, it's for the fact that he did not make that adjustment at all during the game. New England's going to be in that same situation. If the safeties don't play back to respect Bolden, who's probably one of the best receivers to catch the ball in traffic, and Torrey Smith, who's probably the best down-the-field running wide receiver in the league, if the safeties don't play back to respect that and assume that's going to be a one-on-one matchup favorable to the Patriots, this game may not even be close by halftime. I think that the Ravens, I tend to think that you're going to see the New England secondary have to respect the passing game, actually, of Baltimore, and is going to allow Ray Rice to have a better game. It'd probably have a better game on the ground than we thought, maybe to the tune of 130 yards and maybe 1 or 2 touchdowns. And I just think New England secondary is just not good enough to stay with or to adjust. Despite what we hear about Bill Belichick and his prowess as defensive coordinator, I think New England's defense is not nearly as good as Denver's, and Denver's just got destroyed. I tend to think, and I'm with you exactly, and this is, I guess, cliche but true, is assuming that there's no turnovers on the part of on the part of Joe Flacco, and who tends to play really well against New England. I like Baltimore's chances really well in this game. So yeah, so maybe that is the jinx coming back, I guess. But I think the matchup nightmare between the running game of the Ravens and the deep passing game of Flacco is going to make this a pretty hard sell for me to believe that New England wins it.
Yeah, well, it sounds like we both, agree on a bunch of different points, which kind of now scares me into my picks, and maybe I'll flip the other way if we have any time on the Super Bowl podcast. I think I think we are leaning towards, and you're going to get, for a guy who doesn't like the narratives, you're going to get the narrative again about the Harbaugh Bowl, and if both teams do win, and the ability of both brothers to not only get their teams and a short amount of time. Obviously, John Harbaugh's been with the Ravens for a little bit of a while now, but the ability of both brothers, to get their teams into the Super Bowl, and just some of the stories about their family and how football minded they are is going to really be the prevailing thought. And you got 2 teams with good defenses and quarterbacks who you wouldn't take as top teams in this league, leading their teams, to the Super Bowl. But I really do think it's shaping up that way. I think we both agree the Niners have the advantage, and I think that the Ravens, I wouldn't say they're the team of destiny, but of the teams that are into Denver and win a game like that in a tough atmosphere, especially in the mile high, not only the temperatures, but the thin air, and you saw some of the Baltimore players, in terms of getting some of the oxygen to them, because of it takes time to adapt yourself to breathing in that air. Having been in Denver, if you're not from because of how high above sea level Denver is, but I think that if Baltimore can do all of that, especially on a short week, now they're going into New England. Where a place where they've played well in years past, and I just really think that this is their time. Just like we talked about with Atlanta, in terms of getting that playoff victory off the back, this is really the time for Baltimore. If there ever is going to be a time for them to really take that next step, and unfortunately for them, that next step leads to a berth in the Super Bowl. And with the storyline of Ray Lewis's last year, I really do think they get it done.
I tend to feel the same way too, but to your point about annoying narratives, trust me, Mike Leon, when I tell you I would sooner take the Harbaugh than the incessant nonsense about Tom Brady going up against the San Francisco 49ers, and Tom Brady, of course, being from San Mateo, California, and being a 49er fan, and I can't even say this without just sounding like I'm whining like a kid, and of course trying to win his 4th Super Bowl and tie his... I'm going to vomit just talking about it. So trust me, I will take the horrible any day of the week. Mike, let's stop there.
We'll leave it for the Super Bowl part. Yeah,
absolutely. So let's do this, folks. Obviously, next Sunday is the most boring Sunday of the calendar year, as we are waiting avidly for the Super Bowl. So, Mike, I think next week when we do, if we are able to get together for our podcast, I think we're going to talk a little bit about, well, obviously we'll maybe do, I don't know if we'll do a Super Bowl preview show, but maybe we'll just do an all NBA podcast. Let's kind of start rolling on that, as we'll, folks, fans of the show will know that we are going to continue pressing on, even though we keep using a Raider logo for the show. Moving on to other sports, and the NBA gets to be really interesting, and trying to make some sense of a regular season that, at least according to the guys on the Dan Le Batard show, seems to be a snoozer. But I think it's a compelling one nonetheless. So, Mike Leon, I look forward to doing this again with you next week, talk a little basketball, maybe wrap up the conference championships, and then, folks, in 2 weeks, the big Super Bowl bonanza, for lack of a better phrase.
Absolutely, Nick. Always good talking to you, man, and very excited to see what happens in these 2 games. Yeah,
me too. Mike Leon, thank you very much. And folks, thank you again for listening. YouTube.com/NPZ1978. You can find Mike Leon at DAKIDLEON, Twitter. Mike, I hopefully got that right. You can, of course, find me, NPZ1978, on Twitter, where my Twitter, much like Mike Leon's, continues to blow up all the time. Thanks again, folks, for listening. We'll see you next week.